This is why 2026 has been called BTS Jungkook's best year of his career. The year 2026 does not come as a mere number in BTS's Jungkook calendar. This year comes like a marker of destiny, a high point that is slowly but surely built since he was a teenager aged 15 years, leaving his home, family, and childhood for a dream that at that time was not necessarily called success. In the eyes of the global public, 2026 is now starting to be touted as Jungkook's best year of his career, not just because of his brilliant achievements, but because of the emotional meaning and maturity that finally fused perfectly in him. Since the beginning of the year, the atmosphere around Jungkook's name has felt different. It is no longer just the euphoria of a popular idol, but the aura of a whole artist who has gone through various phases of life. Jungkook in 2026 is no longer the golden mean, revered only for his natural talent, but a mature figure who stands on long sacrifices, wounds that are not always visible to the camera, and the great responsibility he has assumed from a very young age. The public is beginning to realize that what is happening in 2026 is not instant luck, but rather the accumulated result of many years of perseverance. Musically, 2026 became the year in which Jungkook truly found his own voice. The works he released in this period were not only commercially successful, but also received much wider critical acclaim than in previous years. The songs feel more honest, quieter, and deeper. There is fatigue that is not hidden. There is longing that is not made up, and there is hope that is conveyed without shouting. Many listeners felt as though Jungkook was no longer singing for the big stage, but rather speaking directly to their hearts. What makes 2026 feel special is the way Jungkook positions himself. He is no longer stuck in the shadows of industry expectations or the pressures of a perfect idol image. This year, she looks calmer, more selective, and more true to her own limits. In several interviews, Jungkook did not hesitate to admit that he was once exhausted, once felt empty despite being surrounded by cheers. This recognition, on the contrary, made the public respect him even more, because such frankness rarely arises from a figure of his size. Many industry observers say that Jungkook in 2026 is a rare example of how a big star can grow without losing its identity. It does not pursue sensation, does not impose controversy, and does not build false narratives. Everything he does feels natural, as if he's finally at peace with himself. This maturity is reflected not only in the music, but also in his attitude before the public, the way he talks about the past, and his way of valuing the people who have supported him from the beginning. It is undeniable that the year 2026 is also a moment of great reflection for Jungkook towards his family. Although rarely exposed, many fans have noticed that the theme of family and parental sacrifice appears more and more often in his works and sayings. Jungkook seems to want to say that everything he achieved today is not just his own. There is a mother who always asks about her situation when the world only demands performance. There is a family that she thinks about every time she feels tired. It's this emotional element that makes Jungkook's journey in 2026 feel so much more human. On the global front, Jungkook's influence this year transcends the boundaries of fandom. He is not only talked about as a member of BTS or a successful soloist, but as a symbol of the hard work of young Asians on the world stage. Many international media began to discuss Jungkook not in a sensational tone, but analytically and respectfully. They see him as a figure who is able to survive in a harsh industry without losing empathy and modesty. Interestingly, the peak of Jungkook in 2026 does not actually feel explosive. There is no sense of forcing or wanting to prove something. Everything flowed quietly, as if Jungkook was finally where he was meant to be. It is no longer running, but steady walking. And precisely therein lies its strength. The public sees a man who has come to terms with his past and is not afraid to face the future. For ARMY, 2026 feels like a long gift after waiting and watching Jungkook grow from a shy boy into a full-grown, conscious man. Many fans admitted that they were not only proud, but also moved. Jungkook is not just an idol who succeeds, but a figure who teaches that true success is not always about speed, but endurance. Finally, the reason 2026 was named BTS's best year of Jungkook's entire career wasn't just because of sales figures, awards, or global popularity. This year has been the best because Jungkook looks the most intact as a human being. He sings not to prove anything, but to endure, to be honest, and to live. And perhaps, that's the highest peak an artist can reach. In the midst of a fast-forgetting entertainment world, 2026 will instead be remembered as the year in which Jungkook not only shone, but also breathed quietly under that light. And it's at this point that Jungkook's story in 2026 becomes deeper, quieter, yet even more disturbing. After all the spotlight, praise, and recognition pouring in, Jungkook hasn't turned into a validation-hungry figure. Quite the contrary, he seemed to withdraw more and more inward, more and more carefully choosing a step. Many people think the peak of a career will make a person complacent, but Jungkook in 2026 chose to be silent more often. Meaningful silence. A silence that feels like the process of rearranging life after years of running without really having time to stop. Behind the magnificent stage and the never-ending applause, Jungkook began to show a side rarely seen before. A man who learned to enjoy the little things. He talks about getting enough sleep, about enjoying a simple meal, about coming home without a strict schedule. To some, those things sound trivial. But for Jungkook, who since he was a teenager lived in a tight schedule and constant pressure, it was all a luxury. And in the year 2026, he can finally have it without guilt. The loyal listener begins to notice this change in every note he emits. His voice no longer sounded rushed. There is pause, there is space, there is courage to not always be perfect. Jungkook's songs in this phase are like a diary that is read slowly at night, not a victory cry in a stadium full of light. And precisely because of this, the impact is felt much deeper. Many people cry not because the lyrics are tragic, but because they feel understood. 2026 will also be the year Jungkook stops proving that he can do everything. He is no longer obsessed with being the best in every aspect. He chose to focus on the things he really wanted to convey. This decision surprised some industry observers, but slowly they realized that this is a form of true freedom. Jungkook is no longer controlled by expectations, but by an awareness of himself. On the other hand, Jungkook's relationship with his fans has changed, not moving away, but rather becoming warmer and more mature. He no longer speaks from the stage to the sea of people, but is like someone sitting opposite and saying, "I, too, am a man. I, too, have ever been tired." These simple sentences actually become a much stronger emotional binder than big promises. ARMY felt not only loved, but also invited to grow together. Many say that Jungkook in 2026 finally stopped chasing the ideal version of himself in the eyes of others. He chose to accept his version of himself as he is, with wounds, with fatigue, with fears that he cannot always hide. And that's where the paradox occurs. When Jungkook stops trying to look perfect, the world instead sees him as the most shining figure. This year also shows how Jungkook defines success differently. He no longer defines it with graphics or ratings, but rather with inner calm. On some occasions, he implies that being able to wake up without anxiety is already a great achievement. This statement resonates strongly, especially for the younger generation who live amid the pressure to always be faster, more powerful, and more visible. Looking back, Jungkook's journey to 2026 feels like a long novel full of twists and turns. From a shy child who doubts himself, to a global symbol that brings hope to many. But the highlight of the story is not when he stands in the center of the world's spotlight, but when he is able to stand up for himself without losing himself. That's the reason why many people call 2026 not just Jungkook's best year, but the most honest year of his life. And perhaps when someday Jungkook's name is remembered in the history of world music, people will remember not only his achievements and popularity. They will remember a man who chose to endure with heart, who grew without hardening, and who proved that being great does not have to lose flavor. The year 2026 isn't just about BTS's Jungkook. This year has been a mirror to many, that after all the struggles, after all the tears and sacrifices, the ultimate happiness is when we can quietly say to ourselves, "I've come this far, and I'm fine."